This RealAg Radio Podcast is brought to you by new Focus NXT herbicide from FMC. Focus NXT herbicide delivers a complete burn-off and extended residual control solution tailored for spring wheat growers in the black soil zone. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday, February 27th, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Yes, it is time for the Friday Issues panel. On today's show, I've got Marvin Slingerland with MMP and Kelvin Heppner, of course, of RealAgriculture. And Sean Haney is away, and we don't have a beef market update, but we do have a laundry list of news and topics and issues and things that we do need to unpack. So today, I've got on my list at least some feedback on the CFA AGM. Marvin was there on a panel, so I'll ask him his thoughts on some of the things I heard in the room, some of the perspectives as well. We do have, of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney is headed to India today and also to Japan and Australia, so we'll talk about that. We had Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservatives and the official opposition, spoke in Toronto this week and finally sort of laid out how he thinks Canada should be handling its relationship with the U.S. and Trump specifically, of course, so we'll talk about that. And then, of course, there are all sorts of different things. We got some reports out this week. We'll talk about maybe some plant breeding as well. There's just so much that happened, so stick around, everyone. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I'll have Marvin and Kelvin here on the Issues panel to break down the top news, the top issues, our top thoughts of the week.
Now that's what I call Crop Protection 2026 edition from BASF. Coming at you with encore-worthy products canola farmers know and love. We've got all your favorite herbicides, Centurion ADV, Certitude, and new Liberty AM. Plus the headliner of fungicide, Cotegra. If your lineup doesn't sound this good, what are you waiting for? Lock in your set list and get ready to rock! AgSolutions.ca/CanolaFest.
It is time for today's product spotlight. Dr. Andres Reyes-Gage, Technical Manager for Acadian Plant Health. What do biostimulants do at the seeding and seed window?
Spring is always coming with a lot of different unpredictable weather conditions. So in many areas in the US, in Canada, growers are having to plant earlier because they're trying to look for that good moisture soil conditions to get their crops out to a good start. Early in the season, we're going to see a lot of many different challenges. All of these factors are really going to have a negative impact on crop establishment. Our bioactive compounds are going to help with that germination, are going to help support that early root growth, are going to help with that water and nutrient uptake. So you're seeing a lot of different benefits throughout the season that stack up together. And all of these help really maintain that final yield potential for your crop. You can learn more about us at our website, acadianplanthealth-na.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment brought to you by Oxbow, the latest innovation from New Farm. A versatile broadleaf in-crop herbicide powered by Deccox technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. Kochia will be up for discussion on Monday night on The Agronomist, so check that out too. But that's not what we're here for. We are here on Friday for the Issues panel, and joining me, I've got Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba. How are you, Kelvin?
Doing well here, Lyndsey. The wind is howling. We've got a bit of it's almost trying to blizzard here to send out February and bring in March, but hopefully the last stretch of winter here.
In like a lion, so they say. I guess we'll have to see how that goes. Okay, speaking of people who know windy places, it's Marvin Slingerland. He's the Senior Vice President of Agriculture for MNP in Southern Alberta. That's why I say that. Marvin, how are you?
I'm doing well, Lyndsey, and it seems like I just can't get away from you. Like,
I've been
saw you in
following
Ottawa 2 weeks ago. I saw you this week, and now we're back online again
Yes.
together.
Yeah, exactly. We're new besties, Marvin, whether you like it or not. We are. But yes, we were at, maybe that's where we'll start, Marvin. It was the Canadian Federation of Agriculture's AGM in Ottawa, ran Tuesday, Wednesday. You were on stage as well. I got to sit and listen to that panel. Marvin, your thoughts on like the vibe? Because it was a bit of a different like agenda. And I think a lot of focus on sort of the moment we're in right now with the next policy framework and you know, trade being such a big issue. And so what were your thoughts on the event this week?
It was definitely a different vibe, Lyndsey, and a lot of the discussion typically at these meetings are around what needs to be changed when it comes to whether it's BRM framework or whatever. But I think the on purpose and design, I think the focus of this meeting was to sort of direct people's attention to where agriculture can actually end up in Canada. And I think there was a lot of optimism and a lot of talk around growth and how do we actually grow the Canadian agriculture economy and make it the world leader it is. And it is a big driver for our economy, and I think we're well positioned to capitalize on it going forward.
It certainly was a big part of the focus. I attended the workshop that looked at what if so putting sort of business risk management aside, what else should sort of the government be doing, or what else would you like to see for programming? So that was super interesting. There are, of course, some competing thoughts on what to do, what not to do. I think one of the like key take homes for me, and this is looking back, maybe not looking forward. And Kelvin, I want to ask you about a conversation you had yesterday on this, but one of the people at our table said, name me one like AAFC led initiative over the last year. Like a big change. Nobody could really come up with anything. So then we went back like 2 to 3 years. We had like a few things around the edges where AFC had, participated or backed something or whatever. But it became abundantly clear that like the hangover of so many years of having an ag department that didn't really have any latitude to do anything is what we are dealing with, or at least in part what we're dealing with. Kelvin, you had a conversation yesterday, and you'll hear it at RealAgriculture.com in due time, talking about, some of the lobbying that happened this week in some of those conversations. Are we maybe looking at some changes on that front, do you think?
It sounds like there's reasons for optimism. I'm not sure whether, like a lot of the things coming out of our federal government right now, to the Carney government, there's a lot of talk and words that people are excited to hear and haven't been said for the last 10 years. It's a matter of the follow through and the action behind those words, whether that will happen. But yeah, this week, in addition to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture AGM, it was also another grain week where Grain Growers of Canada brought a bunch of representatives from across the country into Ottawa as well. And it sounds like Mark Carney's message, to which he became Liberal leader about a year ago now, and Prime Minister by default before the election last spring, where he talked about bringing the focus back to the economy and productivity and those types of priorities. And it seems like, hearing from some of the farmers that were in Ottawa this week, that message is not only filtering through MPs and through cabinet, through MPs, but it's now reaching the bureaucrat levels, which is where it needs to really happen. Because like you said, Lyndsey, the bureaucrats, not by their own fault, just the way the system is set up in many cases, have been very risk averse. There's not much impetus there for trying new things or having courage to implement bold ideas or move the industry forward when you can just stay with the status quo, which is seen as safe. And so I think that is filtering down to that level. And we even heard yesterday there were competing speeches in Toronto. Pierre Poilievre was at the Economic Club giving his vision of trade with the U.S. and China as well, along with that. Apparently just a couple blocks away, Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's lead minister in cabinet on Canada-U.S. relations, was giving a separate speech. And apparently LeBlanc even talked about how bureaucracy is holding Canada back from making changes now, where where the elected officials want to make changes, but it's bureaucracy that needs to get out of the way. And even to hear that from the government, again, we're hearing words that I think many in Canadian agriculture are excited to hear. It's a matter of the follow through and seeing what happens now.
Mm-hmm. Marvin, that was definitely one of the conversations was was realistically frustration with, different groups or organizations, whatever, saying like, here's a problem we have, what do we do about it? And getting either, oh, we'll meet about it in 6 months, or, oh, well, we'll have a talk about it later. But what did you hear from individuals about, just the time it takes to do things?
Yeah, that's one of the fundamental issues we're facing in Canada. To spur the economy, we need a business-friendly investment climate. And I think if we can streamline regulations, streamline red tape, have a favorable tax policy that's competitive with other jurisdictions, we will attract investment and we will grow this economy. And I think that is the overarching message that was being heard in Ottawa this week, is make it a friendly place to invest. The capital is there. Like we know the capital is there. And if you look at the $7 billion that was announced 2 weeks ago, there is investors willing to invest in this sector, but we need a business-friendly climate to do it, and a predictable, boring government to implement it. And we just have to let business do what they do best, and that is grow. And if we can figure those things out, coupled with new trade deals, agriculture can literally take off.
One of the things, Kelvin, you mentioned Pierre Poilievre's speech this week. One of the things he said, or that he would implement, is if you invest capital in new tech or new capital, you essentially, that so long as you took your capital gains and reinvested them, you wouldn't have to pay the capital gains, right? So you could continually cycle that capital so long as you were reinvesting it in the business, which I think a lot of people were glad to hear. But there's sort of two parts to this. And Marvin, you sort of hit on it, of the, and you mentioned it during your panel, of like, we sort of need government to just set up the parameters so that people can run their businesses and grow their businesses without sort of getting in the way. And then there's also this sort of like second part is like, so we identify that there's like red tape and there's systems and there's things that get in the way, or maybe heavy taxation or those sorts of things. But then and to come back to this point, there's also this overarching, like, we're just so darn slow. Like, we just don't, like, nothing happens quickly. Everything is slow. And that comes back to that bureaucracy point. So Kelvin, it is interesting to hear from someone like LeBlanc of like, we need to move faster on these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Velocity matters for capitalizing on opportunities. And so that's where just sitting still and taking another year to discuss what we want to come up with as a consensus and that type of thing, I'm not sure that this moment allows for that right now. And so that, but I don't know. I'm still curious where we will see that action, where we will see that movement, because like right now it is a lot of talk, and sure, we have major projects announced. We have Carney traveling all over the world and off to India now to work on trade deals and market access, as Marvin alluded to. But what are the actual changes? The government has hardly been able to pass legislation since the election last year. Where is this actually going to happen? And that's, yeah, we need bold leadership. And I'm not sure that at this point, everybody's saying we want change. We need, status quo isn't good enough. And I think that was, again, the messaging in Ottawa, whichever meeting you were at. But what does that action actually look like? And where does government needs to hear that feedback from industry, where industry has a consensus. We need this and this and this to unlock, for government to get out of the way, or to unlock this opportunity. Where is there consensus on that? And I know Canadian Federation of Agriculture is a broad range of our industry, and so you do, like you said, like I think you alluded to, Lyndsey, there's many different voices there, and so often it's difficult to necessarily come up with specifics in a room like that. But somewhere people like Cody Blois need to take that message to Prime Minister Carney and say, this is what needs to happen to unlock this opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Blois was there on the Wednesday. Sean Haney guided that conversation, which was interesting. I did want to point out the conversation. It's with Scott Hepworth, Kelvin, that you had. So that will be
yes,
up.
I forgot to mention. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Grain
Growers Chair Scott Hepworth.
Yeah, I realized I didn't either. Yesterday. Sorry, Scott. But it will be on RealAgriculture.com, and of course on our podcast feed as well. So check it out. Or maybe we'll run it next week, but so that you can hear it. Before we go to a break, Marvin, we did one piece of news this week. Is we did get word that pasture-related expenses would now be eligible under AgriStability for 2026. How big of a deal is this, will it be, or maybe I should phrase it this way, will this be enough to have more livestock producers participate in agri-stability?
It should, Lyndsey, and in my opinion, every livestock producer should be in the program right now, especially with the profitability and the building the margins back up. And this is a good news for the livestock guys, because typically in a drought year, if you're running out of grass, you're either buying hay, which is an allowable expense to feed your cattle, or else you're renting more pasture. And it's the same thing. Like you're buying feed, and it should be an allowable expense. And it's been a pain point, and even something I can figure out either why you can never use that as a expense in those drought years. So it is good news, and it's one of those little irritants that has been bugging the industry for a long time. So this is positive, and I think that's our message on the BRM program as well. Like fundamentally, the program is good. It just needs little tweaks here and there, and this is one of those.
Yep. Okay. So, and that story is, of course, also on the website. Manage weeds early in your canola, cereals, and pulses with Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO, powered by Duplasn Technology, advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed burndown from New Farm. We're going to take a quick break here, and I'll be back with more of the issues panel right after this.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio. It's now time for a product spotlight with Koch Agronomic Services, and we're joined by Bryce Geisel.
So it really is going to depend on the source of your nitrogen, where you're applying it, how you're applying it, when you're applying it. All those pieces are going to have a huge influence, and there really is no one-size-fits-all. So if we look at the stabilizers, you can utilize a urease inhibitor like Anvil, and that's going to help reduce that volatilization losses of urea or UAN. You can use a nitrification inhibitor like Centuro. That can be used whether it's anhydrous ammonia, UAN. That help reduce that leaching denitrification loss. So those two pieces. And then there is the dual inhibitors, and used to be able to help manage all three forms of loss. So a product like Super U or Tribune. Have a good understanding of what your loss conditions are going to be based on your operation, and then choose the product that's going to help that.
If somebody wants more information, where do they go, Bryce?
Absolutely. You can go to Koch, that's KOCH, agronomicservices.ca.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday, February 27th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this is your reminder that the Canadian Crops Convention is in Toronto this year from March 10th to 12th. This year's theme is Trade in Transition and includes a fantastic lineup of expert speakers and great networking opportunities. Check out what the Canola Council of Canada and the Canada Grains Council have planned and register at CanadianCrops.ca. All right, we go back to our issues panel. I've got Kelvin Heppner, Marvin Slingerland. Kelvin, I'll start with you. We did mention it briefly in the last segment that the Prime Minister is back on a plane today, headed off on another trade mission. Definitely a lot of people on this trip too, off to India.
Yeah, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, one of the Atlantic Canadian premiers, I believe, is also joining this delegation, and Carney's also making stops in Japan and Australia. So, but India is certainly the focus, and Premier Moe going there with the expectation that there could be progress on reducing or removing the tariffs on pulse crops in Western Canada. Certainly another. We've spent a lot of oxygen talking about the Chinese tariffs on canola, but pulses to India is certainly also a major one. And so hoping there's at least hints and that there could be some progress on that. It sure seems like expectations have been set now coming out of the China trip a couple months ago that a similar thing might happen here in India. And also a lot of parallels when it comes to a reset of this relationship that was strained over foreign interference and allegations of dark stuff happening. Of course, former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that the Indian government was involved in murdering a Canadian a couple of years ago, and it sounds like Carney's trying to put that in the past and focus on trade and unlocking economic opportunities on this trip to India.
I mean, this is diplomacy, I guess, right? It's a delicate balance of making sure you keep a conversation going without maybe condoning certain behaviors, et cetera. And we saw that with, Carney dealing with China as well. Marvin, you read an interesting headline, basically touting that, this meeting with India could be huge for Canada, that, they're willing to buy all sorts of stuff. How important is it, do you think, that we have, yes, some warming relations with China, but now potentially also India?
I think it's really important, Lyndsey. And the headline you're referencing was this morning on the CBC, energy hungry India tells Carney we are willing to buy whatever Canada is offering. And considering India is one of the world's largest economies, I think it's important that, and Murad from AGT Foods at the conference said it really good, we have to look at our agriculture as a four-legged stool, where we have the United States, and we're never going to replace the United States. But it's like, what else can we do? And that is looking at China, looking at India, and also looking at the emerging economies around the world. And we have to have that mentality of what else can we do, not a replacement. And India is a big part of that. And you look at 1.4 billion people, and we're positioned, whether it's energy, whether it's food, we can we should have a good trade relation with that country.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so a lot of energy goes to India from Canada. Phosphorus is another one. Yeah. And then of course our pulse crops. I mean, India is an interesting partner because of course they are highly they manage their supply they don't have supply management, but they manage their internal supply quite a bit. So it is a market that Canada is used to having tariffs sort of put on and taken off depending on what India is doing on the pulse side, but it's definitely a huge market for our Canadian pulses. We did have, and we mentioned it, Pierre Poilievre spoke, Kelvin, in Toronto. I think overall the speech went well. Then there was a sort of fireside chat afterwards. I actually listened to it all. I will admit I listened to it at 1.5 speed, so I might have missed some things. But it was the first time that Poilievre really laid out a direct sort of, here's how I would deal with Trump. Kelvin, how do you think it's gone over so far?
It sure seems like it's received a very warm reception. I'm not sure that he said a whole lot new. Maybe it was the tone and manner and format. In fact, it was in Toronto at the Economic Club, and the media was paying attention. I think in many ways, and he was maybe a little bit more direct in terms of standing up to President Trump and what Trump has said about annexing Canada and all those types of threats, and how Poilievre said that that's never going to happen, like it's not even worth talking about kind of thing. And he also, I thought, made a point that we often make here on the show in our coverage as well, that the U.S. market cannot be replaced. Sure, Carney can talk about diversifying Canada's trade and trying to reduce dependence on the U.S. market, but there's no replacing that market. We know that in agriculture, in our export-focused commodities, where 3/4 of what we export from Canada goes to the American market, there's no way that incremental increases to sales in China or India or other or the EU will replace that. So I thought Poilievre made a good point there in terms of maybe we should stop calling it a rupture, because this will move on and this relationship will last. So I'm not sure that some of these points will go over as super popular, because a lot of Poilievre, when you contrast what Poilievre and Carney say, there's a lot of similarities right now in terms of their talking points. But one of the contrasts is that Carney seems to be looking more to export, or looking at diversifying exports, looking to other countries to kind of solve some of our problems, whereas Poilievre saying more along the lines of, we need to change what we're doing domestically, we need to get out of our own way, that kind of thing. That, again, going back to what we were talking about last segment, requires change here at home. And if we're not willing to change, that gets real uncomfortable. So I'm not sure how politically popular some of the things that, as well received as his speech was, in terms of him kind of there's this narrative that he's finally talking about this topic. It's been well received on that front, but I'm just not sure in terms of voters, the message of we like to blame other people for our problems. We don't, and that's where the whole elbows up thing comes into this as well. Poilievre's a little bit more self-reflective on our country, or asking us to look internally, and I'm not sure how well that will go.
So, and I will share, as someone who's been highly critical of Poilievre's demeanor and his delivery, etc., he did incredibly well at this speech. It was interesting. He was well
Showed his potential.
He did. He really seemed like prime minister potential. Like he really did he slipped into French and English, and it really did provide, and I know this is maybe silly, but this is part of Canada, it really did provide an insight into how poor Mark Carney's French is when you hear Poilievre slide in between the two languages effortlessly. His tone is excellent. And he didn't have the, if I may, he kept the sort of combative pompousness that can come out in like question period, etc., that he's known for. There was none of that. Like it was very, on message and incredibly well done. And I sort of felt like, this is like, we need to see more of this if more Canadians are going to, because to your point, a lot of Carney's policies, a lot of what Carney's stance is directly out of, a conservative's playbook. But it's, Canadians overwhelmingly, maybe party-wise split conservative and liberal, but not leader. Go ahead, Kelvin.
Also, another similarity, word coming out now over the last day, that Poilievre is planning an overseas trip as leader of the opposition, which is something that he hasn't done, and certainly something that Carney's been doing in the last year. So another thing where I think that also checks another box in terms of making him look like prime minister potential.
Mm-hmm. Marvin, he also said in his speech, and so to that point, he said that he encouraged Canadians to talk to their U.S. counterparts, to head down to the U.S., to travel, and to, make all these inroads. Marvin, do you think, and we saw, of course, an MP head down to Washington not that long ago and sort of on his own tour, we think, with Jamil Javani. But do you think that's important that we have, business to business or person to person or MP to congressperson conversations to actually move this forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you really talk to producers across the country who do travel and do go to association meetings down south, if you talk from whether it's the Beef Association to the Beef Association in the States, everybody wants this resolved. Everybody wants trade to resume on a normal parameters, and both countries are playing the political side, and I think there's a lot of American associations afraid to really speak up with the risk of losing access to the White House. But I think bottom line, businesses just want things go back to what it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. And it's such an intertwined economy. We need it to resume. And I think that is the more people hear it on both sides of the border, the better it'll be for everybody.
Kelvin, if we do get a renewal of CUSMA, can we actually go back to sort of how things were? Even with that?
I think in the business commerce world, yeah, I think it's just a matter of this constant upheaval and chaos and uncertainty as to what the tariff situation is, all those types of things. It's a matter of businesses will adapt once they have a predictable playing field to work in. I think that then we could see some return to what we used to think of as normal. Going back to Poilievre and his speech, though, I agree, high marks on style. On substance, though, I think there is some concerning aspects for agriculture. We heard Poilievre, as part of his reiteration that the Canada-U.S. relationship is important, say that Canada should be totally willing to block Chinese vehicles just to maintain access for Canadian vehicles into the U.S. or Canadian manufacturing into the U.S. Well, what does that mean for agriculture? We just saw this play out on the tariffs on canola when Canada implemented 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. I think this is something and just in general, the leverage that Poilievre outlined Canada having in terms of the upcoming CUSMA USMCA negotiations, I'm not sure how, again, he's the leader of the opposition. He doesn't need to actually implement these ideas. He's not in government needing to do this stuff. So, but some of the things he talked about in terms of Canada having leverage, I'm not sure how strong that would be. And so, again, he can do that as opposition leader. But it's another concerning sign, though, that I think the Conservative Party, which farmers in general across Canada, especially in Western Canada, just by default, we think they've got our interests because we know a lot of the MPs have farming backgrounds and that type of thing. But here, we definitely heard Poilievre say that he would choose the auto sector and we've seen in the past that means jeopardizing agricultural exports.
Yeah, we had Neil Townsend, of course, was on Wednesday's show and talked very frankly about, canola is it's an easy to target issue for Canada that China can do. We know that, Sunday it's March 1st, so we should see some of those tariffs on meal and oil, and also canola oil and meal and peas to lift potentially. Go ahead, Kelvin.
There actually appears to be some uncertainty on that now too, which with China, it's always not a done deal until they actually do it. But there's been some reporting. This Chinese Ministry of Commerce alluded to the tariffs lifting on meal, but not on some of the other things that we were expecting. So we'll
exactly.
see how that plays out.
But that really does it does bring into, I think it's almost like this weird flip, right? Of like Carney coming out and, going to China and saying that they'd let in, some EVs, et cetera, but, in exchange for actually, fixing some of these tariff issues on agricultural products. And then you're right. Then, Poilievre goes up there and basically says that we've got to do whatever we can and, to keep the U.S. happy and to keep the North American, what do you call it, an auto pact, keep a North American market happy. And so, I mean, to your point, Kelvin, it's true. I mean, our rural areas tend to vote blue and our farmers tend to be conservative on the whole. And yet here we are staring down the barrel of, the Liberal government that seems to actually at least be considering the impact on agriculture and not Pierre Poilievre. So, I don't know. Call your MP, everybody. See how that goes. Okay, we had to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more of the Issues panel here on RealAg Radio right after this.
The future of Canadian food is strong. New markets and new opportunities are met with new innovations and new innovators. And FCC is ready to help the next generation of innovators like you make your mark with financing tailored to your needs and resources to help you keep growing. You're ready. So are we. To get started, visit fcc.ca/youngfarmer. FCC. Dream, grow, thrive.
Rhizosorb is the next generation of phosphorus fertilizer, demonstrating consistent yield results and cost savings to row crop producers across North America.
Unlike other products on the market, Rhizosorb has reliable and consistent results across crops and soil types. It doesn't cost more to use, and no changes to retail or farm operations are needed. Rhizosorb technology is not a biological or a biostimulant, but rather a soil chemistry approach to controlling the release of applied phosphates.
Go to phospolutions.com to find out more.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. Oh, goodness. It is Friday, again, if you can believe it. And I've got the issues panel. Of course, before we get there, get instant answers to your grain marketing questions 24/7. Sanoa is your AI grain market analyst, available anytime to help you understand prices, basis, and market trends so you can act with confidence. Start a free trial and unlock RealAg listener savings at grainfox.ca/RealAg. That's RealAg. All right, I've got Marvin, Slingerland, Kelvin, Heppner, on the issues panel here. Okay. Key question around the table, Marvin, this week at CFA was, how do we make the average Canadian care more about agriculture and agriculture issues? And this piggybacks off our last segment, talking about, autos versus agriculture. We will never be, if we count just farmers per se, we're never winning any party in election. Okay. We know that. That's fine. But then how do we convince people that, agriculture is important and have other people's vote matter for us?
Yeah, one of the hot topics, Lyndsey, was, do we need to change our attitude about what agriculture is in Canada? And do we have to change our perspective to food? We are in the food business. Sure, a prairie's grain farmer might just produce in the raw commodity. End of the day, it ends up somewhere at somebody's plate, typically. So if the focus was shifted to food and the value-added processing, a lot of those jobs are in the GTA or any major metropolitan center. And do the MPs actually recognize the value of those jobs as it relates to the entire agriculture system or the entire food system? And maybe we're focusing the attention in the wrong spot, and we have to look at the end of the line and what the potential is to create this massive food industry in Canada. And I think somebody mentioned it's like around 40 to 50% of our grocery products in Canada are produced locally. Maybe we need to move that needle 10% higher and have have that focus going forward and drive more value added.
Kelvin, this is a bit of it's an interesting observation in some of the conversations we have, is that if you ask farmers, and I would love everyone's feedback in this, is does a farmer, let's say a grain farmer who is producing, as Marvin says, something we would call commodities, do they consider their customer the grain elevator, the grain company, or do they consider their customer, who's eating or processing that, commodity into food? Which one is the customer? Is it the person buying the wheat in another country, or is it the grain company?
I think all of the above. I think farmers in general do see all those steps in the value chain as their customers, and I think what we're maybe talking about here is that we need it to go the other way too, where people feel like they're part of that value chain as customers, as end users, that they are in agriculture because they eat and that type of thing, and they use products grown by Canadian farms and North American farms. I don't know. I'm not going to point the finger at farmers and say that they only see the grain elevator as a customer. I think a lot of farmers are in their job and feel like part of their calling is providing food to the world and that type of thing. So I think there is that view, and sometimes I actually wonder if we go too far with it, because biofuels are certainly a major demand driver these days and could be increasingly so into the future. And so how do we, to me, there's a juxtaposition there where we get some potentially conflicting interests if we're talking up the food part of what we grow, and then have 35% of it going into biofuels or that type of thing. Then we get into the whole food versus fuel debate, and
but
that gets complicated. And that's where I think it just would benefit all of us if more people knew how their food was produced and understood the process, that it isn't all interchangeable and that type.
And the points of the value chain, like to Marvin's point, that a raw ingredient or product has to be processed into something, packaged into something, driven to a grocery store, merchandised to the grocery store. Like, that is all still part of our food chain. That is all still part of the value chain. And there's all sorts. So, there's the entire market, or the entire economy that supports farmers and the ingredient production, but then there's everything that happens after it leaves the farm gate that is also part of that agriculture system, right, in our food system, that when you tally all that up, we know it's a huge amount of people. And maybe you're right, Marvin.
And it's not just in rural areas with blue conservative MPs.
Yeah, exactly. It's in liberal ridings too. And it impacts far more people than just rural Canada, for sure. On the biofuel point, this is one, of course, that we've been talking about a lot in the last 2 weeks. And Kelvin, I asked on yesterday's show on the Rapid Fire, I asked Rob Brunel, who's out of Manitoba, because he had just delivered corn that morning to the ethanol plant. And so I asked him, I was like, do you ever think about this biofuel versus? And he was like, so first of all, we also need energy. So let's just, we have to heat our homes, we have to drive our cars, and there's lots of different sources of that energy, but we need energy to run things. So that's still a need, right? We do get winter for 6 months of the year. We're going to stay warm somehow. And the flip side is, he said, you know what, back in the day, we would have been growing crops that we'd feed to the horses, and the horses were our horsepower to do what we had to do anyway. So he's like, this idea that, farmers haven't always been in some form of the energy business isn't really true. And I find
the chickens in our barn and the pig barn down the road get DDGs in their feed from that ethanol plant as well. So it's not all black and white, cut and dry in terms of the debate and when people try to simplify it. But
exactly, yeah. And I mean,
I agree. Everything these days is energy, and we're seeing more of that. The tech people of the world are reiterating that message right now too. And when India's Modi says they'll take all the energy they can take from Canada, I also wonder, does that include the energy in lentils and peas, or is that just in crude oil? I'm not sure. But ultimately farmers were converting solar energy into food. And so in some ways it is all fuel for different things.
Yes, exactly. It's just different forms of energy and what we actually use it for, right? So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, I want to leave it there for now. We've got one more segment on today's show. So we're going to take a quick break here on RealAg Radio, and we'll be back with more of the Issues panel right after this.
And they're off. It's volunteer canola on the inside, followed by hemp nettle, flax wheat, buckwheat, and narrow-leaved hawksbeard. This is one tough field, folks. But hold the phone here, because here comes Prospect Herbicide making a move on the outside and eliminating the competition one by one. And now, way out in front, it's canola for the win. With two powerful modes of action, glyphosate-friendly Prospect provides exceptional control of broadleaf and grassy weeds to get your canola off to the best start possible. Ask for it at your local retailer.
Co-op has been beside local farmers and ranchers for generations. With Western Canada's largest fuel network and a team of local agronomy experts, Co-op is built to keep your operation moving forward. With deep local knowledge of the factors affecting your farm, we're ready to provide trusted advice in the field and on the ground. Count on Co-op to support your entire operation from season to season. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Visit your Co-op Agro Center to talk to a team member today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday. It is the Issues Panel. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. And boost your yield and your bottom line with top-performing varieties from Alliance Seed, including AAC Weyburn VB Durham that features a solid stem for softfly resistance, along with wheat midge tolerance and top yields. Count on genetics that deliver. Visit allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890. All right, bringing back in the Issues panel for one last segment. I've got Marvin Slingerland with MNP and Kelvin Heppner with RealAgriculture. Oh, where do we go to next? There's so much. Oh, I know. I want to talk about benchmarking. Marvin, this is, I would assume, on the farm management side. I imagine it's a hotly contested topic, but maybe it's not. But we did have Terry Becker on the Ag Policy Connection podcast this week, talking about benchmarking and how this potentially could help us up our farm financial management. What do we think? Do we use enough benchmarking? Should we do it more?
Personally, I think we should do it more. But it's what you do with it that really matters, Lyndsey. And it's no different than if you're a high performance athlete and your coach says you need to make these changes to get better. Until you do that, you're not going to get better. So to me, the benchmark is really just a starting point. It's a baseline. And if you take the time to understand where you're at, the next step is to see what's your potential and how do you actually get to that next level. And what we find with our producers that we do benchmarking with, it's usually the top 25% of our clients that actually use that benchmark to actually just keep driving it better. So, and for me, that's really sad because I find even if you're on the lower end or in the middle, it doesn't matter. It's a baseline and just use it to make your operation better. And this week a lot of people are talking about economic sustainability, and to me, that is so important. If you can drive profitability on your operation, you will create sustainability for the next generation. And yeah, so I encourage everybody to just take a look at it. Your numbers may suck compared to the rest, but just use it as an opportunity to get better. So,
and this is maybe where, to take a step back for people who maybe aren't as familiar with benchmarking, like this is the point, is that first of all, you'd need some way to compare it to other numbers. It doesn't mean you have to know who they are, right? It's anonymous, especially when you get a good group together. But it means that you take certain numbers from your business and compare them with, similarly sized farms or farms doing something similar to what you're doing. So what would some of those actual figures be? Are you looking at ROI on capital? Or are you what actual figures would you compare, let's say, for someone trying to figure out where they land?
Yeah, those would be some of them, Lyndsey. We like to focus mostly on your numbers per acre. So whether that's your revenue or input cost per acre, and then some of your overhead cost per acre, whether that's machinery, repairs. Those are usually the key ones that will actually drive profitability. And obviously gross margin is one of the biggest ones, and your equipment cost per acre. So some of those are the ones producers are should be focusing on, and they're easy to track, easy to measure. And if your neighbor is generating $30-40 more per acre than yourself,
why?
You could probably get there too. Why? And the question is why? And what are other people doing? And there's lots of tools, lots of people to help get you to that next level as well. So I would say it's a huge opportunity for everybody to take a step back and see where you're at and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is a great way, I would say, to take some of the variability out of, like, because we all run different farm enterprises, right? But when you start to drill down to like certain, let's say per acre, or for a cattle producer it might be per cow or per calf, and when you bring it, then at least it brings everything sort of to a common denominator that you can start to actually compare. And I think that, like, the helpful thing that I've done when we've done some of this work is like exactly that. You can identify, okay, so the people who have a really good score, what did they do differently, right? Like, did they, right? There's got to be something that they're doing, and as soon as, you start to have that conversation, you can start to make some of those decisions with your own farm. So, so great discussion. It's super cool. Kelvin, we did get, and I don't know if you have them in front of you, but StatsCan released on this note, farm income receipts, I think. And we have to say thanks to the livestock industry for the positive number that exists, because it wasn't the grain number. What did StatsCan tell us?
Yeah, farm cash receipts, the final numbers came out yesterday for 2025 from Statistics Canada. So, overall, farm cash receipts in Canada, according to StatsCan, up 3.4% last year from 2024. But that was, like you said, led by livestock receipts, up 13.2% as a result of mainly the beef sector, cattle contributing a big part of that. On the crop side of things, crop receipts fell 1.7% to $51 billion in 2025, based on declines for prices for most crops. So this is receipts, not net. So we got to remember that as well. So, and then also program payments were down substantially, mainly due to crop insurance payments being down a large amount with better growing conditions in Western Canada this last year. So, just kind of a snapshot, kind of putting the year in perspective. But again, it doesn't account for increased expenses that definitely cut into margins. So.
Mm-hmm. And Marvin, this is definitely your side of the business. Do any of the StatsCan numbers, does any of that surprise you? Is that exactly sort of in line with where you've got clients sort of planning for the seeding season ahead?
Yeah, and Kelvin sort of alluded to the fact too, like, it is really the beef numbers that drove a lot of that. And to me, it's too bad those numbers don't measure productivity, because a lot of it, if price of beef has doubled in the last 2 years, obviously that number is going to go up. But it doesn't really drive the productivity discussion. Like, did we actually produce more as a country on tonnage or volume? So it's really taking that next step and digging into those numbers and looking at the profitability per unit produced as well. And that is, we have some access to some of those numbers on our side, and that's really the interesting conversation. And it goes back to the benchmark, and is what is your profitability per unit produced?
Mm-hmm. Now, it does. I mean, we know this from the CFSI and how the numbers are rolling out. That, I mean, there's increased risk this year for sure. When it comes to that risk management picture, Marvin, what advice would you have for those who are maybe not sure what to do about, the tight margins ahead, assuming you're not in cattle, because we know that maybe makes that conversation a little easier. Not easy, just easier. But what advice would you have for those trying to sort of figure out how to manage some of this uncertainty?
I encourage a lot of people just to sit down and do a rough projection, do a rough crop plan or forecast what your dairy farm will produce for the year with your input costs, and just even if you stop at the gross margin level and say, okay, my margin last year was this, based on input costs and commodity prices, my margin in 2026, if I grow a decent crop, is going to be X. And if it's if it's less than last year, look what programs you can bring in place, whether it's a combination of agri-stability, crop insurance, private crop insurance, and see what program will actually cover your risk off the best if prices do go down or you have yield issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kelvin, finally, we knew that Ag Minister Heath McDonald was heading to Mexico last week, and then he was going to end up in D.C. Before he came back to Canada. And he said, when I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, that he was going to meet with Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins. But we never heard anything about it until, Kelvin, you reached out and said, hey, did this happen? So the meeting did happen, but why didn't we really hear anything about it?
We don't know. So, the meeting happened on his way back from the Mexico trade mission that we talked about last week. Last Friday, Minister McDonald stopped in Washington on the way back to Ottawa, and he met with Canada's new ambassador to the U.S., Mark Wiseman, and U.S. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins. This is their first face-to-face meeting since McDonald was appointed Ag Minister back in May or June of last summer. And so kind of taken a long time for this to happen, but it's certainly... And I think this is one of the reasons why it was kept quiet, is there's a lot of tension around trade talks and everything, and it's being done at the highest levels. And so the fact that the lead agriculture political figures met, it's likely something where they are trying to keep it under the radar and trying to not disrupt things at the higher levels between the Prime Minister and the President and that type of thing. And the key people negotiating, Dominic LeBlanc and Lutnick and Greer, in terms of the ones who are going to be negotiating the CUSMA USMCA review. And so, there was no social media. No. So typically politicians love to post pictures of people who come visit them and who they have meetings with, especially if they're internet or from a different country, that type of thing. Nothing on the social media accounts that we've found from either Rollins or McDonald. Rollins did share some stuff about the U.S. hockey team beating Canada, and including that eagle attacking a goose photo that the White House shared, but nothing about meeting with Canada's Ag Minister at the same time or the day before. So or a couple days before. So I'm not sure why they kept it quiet, likely due to the sensitivities around the relationship and topics that they talked about. And so, and some people have speculated maybe it didn't go well. Maybe that's why Canada kept it quiet, but I'm not sure it necessarily didn't go well. It just is that they're talking about things that could potentially ruffle feathers. And so, I think they wanted to just meet each other face to face and establish some trust. And that's certainly, I think, positive for both sides.
I agree that, not everything needs to have fanfare per se, but it does feel a bit odd. And Marvin, like from the communication side, does it make you more confident it went well or less confident when we don't see any coverage of it?
I would say more confident in my perspective. Okay. I think it's good. To me, it comes across as they're dealing with sensitive issues and trying to figure out a resolution. Okay. I'd rather have more talk going on in the background than everything blasted in the media. So
okay, less kissing babies, more serious meetings. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, we've got to end it there. We're going to say goodbye, Marvin, but we will have a bonus. Just Kelvin and I. We're going to maybe make fun of everybody. I don't know. Okay, have a wonderful weekend, Marvin. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
You bet. Thanks, Lyndsey.
Okay.
Thanks, Calvin.
Yes, bye, Calvin. I'll be back, of course, from Agronomic Monday. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by new Focus NXT herbicide from FMC. Focus NXT herbicide tackles the toughest weeds, including wild buckwheat, volunteer canola, wild oats, and sow thistle, with simplicity and confidence. See your local retailer today.
All right, here we are in the bonus for our podcast listeners. Thank you, each and everyone. It's just me and Kelvin. Kelvin, what did we not talk about on the show? We covered a lot.
Oh, man. Yeah, there's a few things, I guess. Well, there's a lot of different news that came out this week, but one would be this report from the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition. There's a lot of talk right now at farm meetings that I've been to, at least this winter, about the future of plant breeding with the cuts to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and AFC certainly plays a huge role in development of new cereal varieties, wheats and durum and that type of thing over the last couple decades, for many decades, and still the case. And so there's question marks with some of these facilities being cut, what happens. And there's been this big report that the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition commissioned through Synthesis. Rob Hannam and the Synthesis team put together this report, and they released it this week. Basically, I would say, laying it out there, saying that the status quo isn't an option right now for the wheat breeding system in Western Canada, that it's no longer working, and especially with cuts happening on the federal side of things, that it's no longer working and something needs to change here, kind of along the theme of what we've been talking about all show here. But discussions are underway between the Canadian Wheat Research Coalition, which it includes Sask Wheat, Alberta Grains, and the Manitoba Crop Alliance. And so curious to see what comes out of this report that came out yesterday. They talk about some of the key questions that need to be addressed here, and what the future of wheat breeding will look like in Western Canada. Certainly a huge part of the economy in the prairies, and so it's some big decisions and potentially some big changes that will come out of this report in the coming months, maybe years. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're right. It does spell out a lot of sort of what we have talked around, maybe, but it sort of puts it in black and white that we sort of have to deal with it. It does, in a lot of ways. I mean, as we hear pushback on these cuts to, closing of certain locations and cuts to agriculture in general, I mean, I guess it's one of those things that you don't change until you have to, right? So realistically, it may not be the way any of us want to have to perhaps set a new path forward, but I think realistically it sort of draws a line in the sand. So if you haven't seen that report, we will of course be sharing it, or you can reach out and one of us can send in the link to it. I haven't been through it all yet, but some good stuff in there. Go ahead, Kelvin.
90% of Red Spring wheat acres in Canada this last year were developed by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada breeders.
90%.
90%. And so again, this is kind of like on the trade side of things in terms of if we're going to replace the U.S. market and find diverse markets to export to, it's kind of the same thing on the wheat breeding side of things. We're going if AFC is getting out of the game, 90% of where are we going to get new varieties from? How are we going to fund that? How are the breeders going to get paid? That type of thing, and those types of signals need to get sent years in advance so that companies invest in it. So, as the report says, status quo isn't working.
It's not, well, and it's not an option really if you look at it going forward, right? I mean, we can't say that that's necessarily, we can't depend on it to be that option.
Unless Minister MacDonald comes up with a pot of money for the feds to spend on this, but that's been a decade in the coming. That signal that pot is drying up. So
well, and I guess I mean we've had this conversation, a couple of weeks in a row now about how a country can decide that it values certain things in its society, and it then uses taxpayer dollars to support. And realistically, taxpayers through Agriculture Canada have supported plant breeding for its farmers.
And benefited.
Because
AFC's actually
absolutely
makes money off of it as well. So
exactly, right? So,
and tax returns, of course, in terms of tax income as well. It's another. There's many.
It's complicated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if as a government, and this is not new. This has been over time. If as a government, it's not the priority that those dollars continue to it, then somebody has to fill that gap. And that gap is either going to have to be filled by a company or growers themselves or shared between them, meaning you're going to be paying higher royalties, et cetera. So it is complicated, but it's like, just because, let's say the government, has no intention of coming up with that money, which I don't think they are, then, farmers still need access to new and better varieties. So what is that going to look like going forward? It's a very complicated thing. The one thing I wanted to touch on that we covered yesterday, and just a quick note for anyone who has livestock, some livestock more dependent or use the product more than others, but Deccox, which is a coccidiostat, it is an ingredient that's added to creep feed, sometimes to mineral with a script, sometimes even to milk replacer. The sole distributor of Deccox, so where they have basically been told by the AI manufacturer, so the ingredient manufacturer, that there's a stop sale on Deccox in Canada, put out by Health Canada, which essentially means that whatever feed is already on the floor or already mixed, whatever, for right now, anyway, if it contained Deccox, that's all there's going to be until the stop sale is lifted. And as far as we understand, the stop sale has been put on the ingredient manufacturer based on, as far as we can tell, some form of like a standard operating procedure or some sort of like, quality control type metric that wasn't met. And so Health Canada has put a stop on that. It's important to note this for two reasons. One, of course, farmers who are looking, or ranchers who are looking maybe for Deccox product might not be able to get it depending on how long this goes on. The second part, though, Kelvin, that I think is important to note is that it's also happening at the same time that we are starting to see some of the new regulations in access to some of these products actually start to kick in as far as them being reinforced. And so some producers are being told, you can only get that with a vet script, and up until now maybe have been able to access some things without one. And so there's sort of this conflating of several issues into one. So I highly recommend anyone, if you use Deccox or plan to in the next couple months, because of course, as the weather warms up and there's lots of young stock out there, it is a tool that a lot of farmers would use or ranchers would use. So get in touch with your feed mill, and potentially you may have to get in touch with your vet as well to get a script for an alternative product if you can't access Deccox. So we have that story up at RealAgriculture.com as well. Kelvin, what else did we miss? There was a lot that went on.
The RFK glyphosate discussion is another big one.
Yes.
We talked last week about the glyphosate order that President Trump issued in terms of it being of national importance,
right.
Glyphosate production, and then this week we saw RFK come out with his kind of version or explanation of why that happened and how ultimately the Trump administration is going to move U.S. agriculture towards regenerative agriculture is what he had to say this week. So we'll have to see how that plays out, and certainly leads to some conflict there in terms of the Trump base as to very different perspectives, contrasting perspectives on that.
Well, and so I'm sort of surprised. Now it's a U.S. thing, so our audience, of course, it's happening over there kind of idea, but it does bring out a couple interesting questions, right? Of like, if this is in fact true, like that would be incredibly disruptive to the American food system, in that now it all comes down to what RFK and Brooke Rollins, frankly, consider regenerative agriculture. Like, and let's be honest, do they really know what that is? Do they just have an idea of what that is? Like, it kind of would come down to how they define that and what that actually means. But from what I read and what RFK posted, is, a decreased use of crop protection products. And, that seems to be the one key message there. So, whether or not it's, the goal as far as like what they're actively working towards, it sure seemed like they were, but it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out in practice, realistically.
Yeah,
I'm not
it's
sure
one thing to say these things, and post them on your Facebook page. It's another to actually legislate and regulate.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it impacts the food system and that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. And but I was a little bit surprised at. I didn't hear more about it from the Canadian side. Lots of like discussion, and certainly people have seen some of the Facebook or Twitter discussions going on about it. But I thought I would get more feedback on it, but haven't. But maybe it just takes time for people to see it and think about it and get back to us. So anyway, let's leave it there. Thank you everyone for downloading the podcast, for listening. We welcome your feedback, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or if you're mad, you can email Kelvin, or Sean. But, I like the good news. Okay, Kelvin, have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you. You too, Lyndsey. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Bye, everybody.